If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello all, welcome back to my Bailey's Books column. I'm Alan Bailey, co-creator, co-host, and editor of the If This Goes On, Don't Panic podcast. I have 4 novels for you this time. I'll be starting with a pair of space operas published by Flame Tree Press, both of which are parts of series I've been reviewing for quite some time now. I also have a fantastical mystery and a political nonfiction book for you. As a reminder, I'm going to be slowly decreasing the frequency of this column as Navarre's Book Navigator column increases. That said, I do plan to have a special Halloween edition of Bailey's Books coming this year, so look for that as we get closer to October. So first on the list is Resilient by Alan Stroud, published in 2022 by Flame Tree Press. This is the second book in the Fractal series. We discussed the first book in depth with Alan Stroud in our episode titled Renaissance Man. So if you want to search that and hear our conversation with him, you can go ahead and do that. Resilient picks up where Fearless leaves off. There are some spoilers for the first book coming up, just a warning. The main characters have just taken an enemy ship by force while losing their own ship. The anomalies, named at the end of the first book, possibly of alien origin, have ceased wreaking havoc, as they were doing at the end of the previous book. The action starts with Captain Shan being removed from her position due to her actions in Fearless, and Duggins, who everyone thought was dead, seems to be calling from the old ship. This novel expands the scope of the series a bit, tying in a doctor assigned to help on Phobos Station after an emergency call from the Martian military. And a new mysterious character named Holder is brought into play as well. This character is somehow able to jump bodies, or at least has done so in the past. The novel ties these 3 threads together, exposing a solar system-wide conspiracy with unknown goals. It's quite a ripping yarn. When the action starts, it never lets up throughout the entire book. Stroud manages to tie in some interesting science fiction themes as well, including clones, which were originally introduced in the first novel, as well as the transference of consciousness. Stroud also does a great job discussing the nature of being disabled, PTSD, which were both themes in the first novel, as well as the nature of freedom. Intentional or not, everyone in this book is considering the nature of freedom in one way or another. Holder wants to be free of his situation, others struggle to be free of the Mars Corporation. Shan and Johansson both consider what it means to be free in regards to their disabilities, and, interestingly, have very different opinions on that. Anyway, I flew through this book and quite enjoyed every moment of it. I recommend it if you like high action, hard science fiction, and thoughtful representation of disability. All right, our second book today is What Rough Beast by Michael R. Johnston, published 2022 by Flame Tree Press. This second Flame Tree book wraps up a trilogy I've been reading since the beginning of this podcast. Just to give you a quick reminder, the gist is that humans left Earth thousands of years ago due to environmental issues. As they were wandering space, they were found by this race called the Zhen. They are an alien race of lizard-like creatures that have a very warlike society, think kind of Klingon-ish, and they are ruled by a group called the Zhen Ko. When I first reviewed this one, I suggested the books were a lot like Star Wars if you erased the Jedi and focused only on the fighter pilots. I still think that's a good comparison, but having since watched Battlestar Galactica, I'd say that there's a huge influence from that TV franchise as well. I enjoyed this novel as much as I did the first 2 novels. Where the first novel was about space combat, the second started to focus more on the ground troops. This third novel combines the features of the first 2, including both important space and ground battles in the action. There's also a lot of fun interplay between the characters, Where the previous two books did enjoy an element of banter, this one really leans into the humor aspects. I'd even say that that is one of the defining characteristics of this novel. There are a few other cool alien races as well that are slowly introduced throughout the series. This time, the newest race is the Tabran. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They are actually a race of nanite constructs inhabiting the body of other humanoid races. So that's a pretty cool concept too. Overall, it was a very solid space opera that capped off the trilogy in a satisfying way. One thread was left open for further sequels. However, the author has said that there are no more books planned in the series at the moment. And as far as I know, that has not changed. So pick this series up if you like space opera, humor, and satisfying conclusions. Our third book is Death by Silver by Melissa Scott and Amy Griswold, republished by Queen of Swords Press 2023, originally published 2013. Queen of Swords Press kindly sent me a copy of this reprint earlier in the year after I mentioned I'm a fan of Holmesian mysteries. This book definitely scratches that itch, taking place in an alternative Victorian England where magic is fairly commonplace, if not completely trusted. The part of Holmes is played by one of the two main characters, Julian, a private investigator whose many eccentricities, while not completely overlapping with Sherlock, makes no bones about the character's literary inspiration. Julian's Watson is where the near pastiche of the classic duo really deviates. Ned, the Watson analog, plays a much larger and more active part in the story. He is a metaphysician, their word for magician or wizard, and he is the primary investigator, with Julian doing more of the assisting. And he is also Julian's on and off lover. The story starts when Ned is hired by Victor, Ned and Julian's boarding school bully, to investigate the murder of his father. Of course, everyone in the family is a suspect, as are the household servants and hangers-on. Everyone in the book has a different theory of what's happening, and it's up to Julian and Ned to figure it out. While the novel is perfectly satisfying as a mystery, I feel the strength really lies on the world building and the relationships between the characters, especially Ned, Julian, and Victor, whose characters are really filled out in some of the flashbacks throughout the story. The magic system is enjoyable and thought out, while not beating the readers to death with magic rules. It falls somewhere in the middle of the hard-soft spectrum of magic systems we are used to these days, an area that really seems to be lacking in the fantasy that, at least the fantasy that I've been reading these last few years. There's certainly a heavier romance element to this book than I am used to as well. I'll warn again, as I have in the past, this is not an element that presents itself in most of the reading that I do. I don't particularly seek it out or ignore it. It just seems the books that I read tend to lack a heavy romantic element. So if you're not a fan of romance, just be aware that this skirts the boundary and does have some light sex scenes between Julian and Ned. To put it clearly, there is very little implied. The sex is clearly stated, but there is not a lot of detail, and the novel quickly moves through those scenes. For me, it wasn't a big deal, and if you aren't into that, you can easily skip them without taking away from the rest of the book. There's a lot going on here, so to quickly quantify what is happening in this book, I'd say it's 50% mystery, 30% fantasy, and 20% romance. I think you'll really enjoy this book if you're into fast-paced mysteries, Victorian magic, and Holmes and Watson /fiction. Last, we have Laughing in the Rain, Surviving the Crazy, Hilarious, Scary Times of Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden by Russell Fedorka, self-published in 2022. This is an unusual book for me to be reviewing, admittedly, as it does not deal with science fiction, fantasy, or even horror, unless you consider the last 15 years of politics to be horror, in which case I think I'm right on target. This unique little book starts with an interesting essay from the labor historian Paul LeBlanc, detailing the importance of cartoons in left-wing activist culture. It describes Mr. Fedorka's career as an activist and a cartoonist, and finally reviews the last 11 years of Russell Fedorka's political cartoons, published in an array of socialist newsletters and papers, with plenty of sample cartoons to make you laugh and deepen your understanding of our recent history. This book mostly focuses on national politics from 2010 through Obama's career and, of course, Trump's. The book ends at the beginning of Biden's presidential career. It also covers some politics centered in the Pittsburgh area, though those cartoons are minimal and often gesture toward the wider political climate. These cartoons provide withering commentary on each of the presidents and presidential candidates without exception. Obama and Clinton are by no means left off the hook, and the commentary on Trump and his cronies is even more scathing. For me, as an activist and a person interested in politics, both local and national, this served as a reminder of the political trauma we've endured. I've spent a few introspective hours thinking about my life during these times, and it's no wonder we have a shortage of therapists these days. While valuable for reminders of what we've been through, it adds a complex layer of commentary and humor to our recent past. This book is a quick and worthwhile read. I recommend this book if you enjoy humorous political commentary, labor history, and left-wing philosophy. All right, so that wraps it up. If you enjoy what you've heard, come out and check out our other podcast episodes. Please share us with your friends anywhere and everywhere. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.